And what is sequestration?
That's a very good question, Warren. Sequestration is an act of Congress, and it was never meant to be a permanent act of Congress. Basically, what happened a little over a year ago is a super committee of members of Congress, it's a bipartisan committee, was established to make recommendations on budget cuts to the federal government in order to bring down the $1.3 trillion debt. The deal was that these members of Congress would make recommendations and they would be voted up or down. Congress could not play with those recommendations, they were simply to vote them up or down. And this is how we were supposed to get fiscal responsibility back into the nation. Unfortunately, and not surprisingly to most of us, Congress could not agree on up or down votes, so therefore their hand was forced. And they had to pass an across-the-board sequestration of federal funds. What does sequestration mean to aviation, to general aviation and the FAA? Well, to the FAA, it means $1 billion in cuts to its federal budget. $1 billion cut from its budget is draconian. Impacts are going to be felt all over. Impacts are going to be felt in the number of air traffic controllers, in the number of certification individuals, in the number of safety folks. It is not meant to be a permanent act. Unfortunately, starting January 3rd, we're going to be faced with either this $1 billion in cuts, or Congress will have to come back into session after the elections and come up with established cuts so we do not have an across-the-board sequestration of FAA funds.
Well, but I mean, Congress passed a continuing resolution which sends the funding out until March. So how can they pass that and yet be taking money away?
That's a good question. Sequestration is separate from the continuing resolution which funds the federal government. Let's talk a little bit about a continuing resolution. Every year, Congress must appropriate federal funds for federal agencies. That's what the continuing resolution does. Congress had to pass sequestration that's above and beyond the federal annual appropriations process. Now, Congress can come back in after the elections, depending upon who wins the election, and they can make some decisions so sequestration does not go into play. And that's what everybody is counting on. The problem is, it depends on the outcome of the elections to know which way the cuts are going to go. And everybody is sitting and waiting to see, are Republicans going to take control of the administration and the Senate? If that happens, then we will see established cuts that won't be across the board, that'll get at programs we've all been hearing about through this election process. If the administration stays status quo, and if the Senate does or does not turn to the Republican majority, another set of parameters is going to go into play. So right now, we're really in a state of limbo.
Let's assume that we have the same mix as we do right now: Republican House, Democratic Senate. The incumbent stays in power, then we still have gridlock, right?
We still have gridlock, but because sequestration is so draconian, because you have to do it either holistically or you have to be able to have individual cuts, we are going to have to face very critical decisions. You're absolutely right. There will be impacts that will be felt by everybody, not just in aviation. It'll be every person in the United States will feel impacts to these budget cuts.
So back up again to sequestration. In essence, then, what Congress passed a law which said if we don't do anything else, we're just going to whack everything off at the knees.
That's exactly, well, whack. That's a good way to put it. I've heard that description before. Yes, at the knees, you cut off your limbs. Maybe even take an ear or two while they're at it. Yes, that's exactly what's going to happen. We're talking about a 8.5% reduction across the board in transportation funding. That's huge. We're talking about just short of $1 billion for the FAA. You've got the Department of Defense, you have other mandatory programs, you've got Social Security, you've got Medicare, a whole host of issues that we AOPA do not follow, but will play into what actions Congress eventually takes, depending upon the outcome of the elections.
Okay. Now, the sequestration cuts, is this just arbitrary, or can the agencies say, well, we're going to keep the air traffic controllers because that's important and we'll take the pain someplace else?
Good. Another good question. It is not arbitrary. However, the Department of Transportation does not have full discretion as to where it can cut. If you take into consideration $1 billion has to come out of the FAA, if you start lopping off who you don't cut, the folks or the departments that you do cut will be so exponential that it will be impossible to do. So it is firmly believed that cuts will be felt across the board. We are talking already about, or we're hearing about, a reduction in the air traffic control workforce of at least 1,200 people. It could be as many as 2,000 people that'll be laid off, which means you'll have delays, which means you'll have less flights, which means you'll have all kinds of gridlock when it comes to aviation.
It's beginning to feel a little bit like the PATCO strike.
Well, you know, and there's some folks that have referenced that it's very similar to a situation where there's a complete shutdown. And it was, again, Congress's intent to force members of Congress to be responsible, prevent a PATCO-type strike situation or a shutdown by coming up with cutting programs that could be cut, not at the expense of those that should not be cut.
Okay. Congress has gone home.
Yes.
How did aviation fare in this Congress? Other than the budget issues.
On the budget issues, aviation and general aviation fared very well because there were no user fees imposed on general aviation. It was a long-fought battle. We fought it hard and we won. We are, as you know, have very passionate members, and it's thanks to those passionate members that we were able to succeed with Congress. As it relates to the FAA budget, there's continuing funding for 3 months. We will see come March what programs may or may not be cut. What often happens is the safety programs are the programs that are kept whole. That's your air traffic controllers. It's the very fiber of why we have an FAA. It's the other programs like next generational technology, certification inspectors, the things that help our economy grow and general aviation prosper that may end up being impacted in the next 6 months.
We did get the Pilot's Bill of Rights through Congress.
We did. We certainly did, and it was a great achievement here in Washington when you consider that Congress cannot agree on how to fund the federal government. They cannot agree on any issue. We had 61 senators, U.S. senators, sign on to the Pilot's Bill of Rights, and we had the House pass that Pilot's Bill of Rights in 5 minutes on the House floor. It's monumental for general aviation. We have a good base now of supporters, and we need to keep that base going strong, and it's our intention here in Washington to do that.